Hello there, and welcome to my presentation on growing hemp grain as a high-quality food product. My name is Jeff Koschik, living up in Russell, Manitoba, Canada, and want to throw a thank you out to both Christian and Tara Gray for the invite and from the organizing committee at World Ag Expo to take part in this virtual hemp pavilion this year. So I work for two companies, Hemp Production Services and Hemp Genetics International. Obvious names for what we do, but Hemp Genetics, of course, is the genetics that we provide. We've got 6 cultivars that are on the list of approved cultivars in Canada and are available throughout North America. And Hemp Production Services, which is our food company where we process hemp grain into hulled hemp hearts, cold pressed oil, and protein powders. So we want to take a look at how to meet the market demands and what the market is demanding and how to grow hemp successfully. And I think some of these tips and tricks can be used throughout the hemp industry, whether it's for fiber or for CBD production. But it's an important question that you need to ask yourself, and how can you supply quality hemp? And in my opinion, I think it takes a systematic approach required to maximize that quality. So proper planning, such as attending information meetings such as we are today. Agronomics plays obviously a huge role, and we'll get into that, of course, as that's part of my presentation, along with harvest and storage practices. So here we have a picture of our senior breeder, Dr. Bert Vandenberg. Actively been breeding hemp since about 2003, 2004, and our seed grown in Canada is all grown through the Canadian Seed Growers Association, so it is AOSCA certified. And what we've been looking for the past few years is developing varieties that are high yielding and short in stature for ease of harvest, and making that varieties suitable for all areas within Canada particularly, but also in North America. So with regards to food ingredients, this is our product line through HPS Food and Ingredients. We've got a toasted hemp seed. You can see hulled hemp seed, toasted hulled hemp seed, and those are specific processes that are in one industry, I guess, or one aspect. The second aspect is cold pressed hemp seed oil, not to be confused with CBD oil, of course. So this is taking the full hemp grain, cold pressing it for oil as a culinary oil. When we finish with the extraction process, we're left over with a meal that we can then grind and sift and produce hemp protein powders. And these are depending upon what level of sifting and what screen size we use, we can increase that up to from 20% up to a 15% hemp seed powder. When we look at hemp parts, we have to keep in mind that the consumer, of course, wants to have the same experience all the time, and it's very important so that we together as an industry provide the highest quality hemp parts that we can, or hulled hemp seed. This is a picture that has some issues probably from the cleaning process and a little bit of rancidity. So if we take a look here at the picture, we've got some yellow or brown meats. That means that the seed coat, the grain, was handled a little on the rough side. Some oxygen got into that seed, and thus it causes some rancidity. In other instances here, you can see some shell fragments. Basically what we're doing when we're dehulling hemp is taking that seed and throwing it really against a steel plate, and then trying to clean the meat or nut away from the shell. And we feel that we have a fairly good system to do that. And if you have any foreign weed seeds that escape cleaning, they will show up also as undesirables. So it's important that the consumer has the same experience from product to product, similar to if they were going into a fast food restaurant, say wanted a Big Mac in California, they know what to expect. The same thing they would get in Montana or North Dakota. And I think it's very important that we provide a very consistent product to maintain consumers' confidence in what we grow. This is just a bit of a flow chart for our two process, as I mentioned. So the one process of dehulling, we take the raw hemp seed, goes through a third-party cleaning system where we clean up to 99.95% purity. The dehulling process starts where we get hulled hemp, and the quality control essentially is the testing that's done after the fact. And in fact, we actually test from the farmer's bin. We test the seed. After cleaning, we test the seed, and then at quality control. And this is the process, of course, for the hemp oil. And what do we test for is a question I'm sure you're asking yourself. So apart from physical weed seeds, other objects that we need to clean out of the hemp seed, we need to be acutely aware of the microbiological limits that we have on that seed. This is a raw food product that we're dealing with, essentially, as the previous picture shows, where we have hemp come straight from the farmer's bin, goes through a commercial seed cleaning outfit, through our dehuller, and from that raw food product goes directly onto a consumer plate. So handling of the crop post-harvest or during harvest is extremely important, because we are harvesting at slightly higher moistures, and we need to be very, very concerned about the formation of coliforms, fecal coliforms, salmonella, mold and yeast, a number of different issues. And so all of this has a very stringent testing procedure. And why are we doing this in the first place? And it's really about the hemp seeds composition and how much of a nutritional food it truly is. And I think there's going to be some additional speakers speaking a little bit in more detail on this, so we'll just kind of leave it at that and just have faith that we know that we are consuming a very healthy food product. So to ensure that we remain within guidelines, we have a lot of safety certifications that we uphold, and these are just a few of them. Third-party inspected, and making sure that any claims on our packaging is true. So let's get into a little bit more of, I guess my forte is on the agronomy side of things. Again, I've been working in hemp since 1998 here in Canada, when it became re-legalized, and a lot of my initial work with hemp was as an applied research agronomist. So when it comes to field selection, it's a very important aspect. You want a field that will go into some soil properties that are more desirable for growing hemp. Crop rotation is important too. And if you notice on that previous slide that we had gluten on there as far as a contaminant, and hemp currently is a gluten-free product, and we can claim that. But if we have wheat in our rotation that is seeded prior to the prior year to hemp being seeded, that wheat, if it comes in as a volunteer and isn't controlled the next year with our shorter varieties, a lot of times that wheat comes into the sample, and occasionally it can be extremely difficult to clean it, as it becomes the same shape and size as hemp, and difficult to get out. So rotation, following a legume crop is always good. Hemp's a very hungry plant, so it needs that nitrogen. So crop rotation is very important. Variety selection, once again, what your ease of handling, where you are in latitudinally, how that variety will perform. All of these things are quite essential for growing a good quality product. We'll get into seeding a little bit in more detail in the presentation, and along with fertility. Once again, I have to reiterate that hemp is a large plant, and it's a very, very hungry plant, and definitely needs its groceries. Weed control, which I think fertility has a big part of weed control also, but we'll take a look at some different weed control options using the IPM, or Integrated Pest Management system. And then harvest, and we'll take a look at different harvesting techniques there. So field selection criteria, crop rotation history, as mentioned, very important. Herbicide history, hemp does not like residual herbicides at all. per se. Actually, hemp is quite sensitive to almost all herbicides. There are a few that we do have registered under a minor use program in Canada and are working with our American counterparts through the IR4 project, of course, too. Fertility we'll get into again shortly, but again, making sure that we know what our fertility levels are in the field, and then so that we can add the appropriate fertilizer. Problem weeds, as mentioned, having cereals as a volunteer is an issue. Weed seeds like buckwheat can cause issues, and a number of different things. Soil properties. So we want to try to plant hemp on, it does its best, I guess, on a moderate soil texture, a loam or clay loam. Heavy soils should be avoided just due to the fact that they retain the moisture just a little bit too well, I guess. Hemp likes its feet relatively dry through this initial establishment, and excess moisture can cause some major issues. Sandy soils can work well if there's irrigation or water control, but of course with a sandy soil we don't have as good a water holding capacity. Non-saline and good tilth, and of course good surface and internal drainage. So I always say that if you think that you have the absolute perfect, most consistent field, just plant hemp in there and it will certainly show you all sorts of different issues that you may have, including things like compaction or salinity, etc. But again, one of the major issues, it seems, in establishing hemp is excess water. Here's just a breeder plot of ours that had a slight depression in the field where water ponded for a period of time. You can see how hemp in its very early stages in development just doesn't seem to be able to handle an excess amount of moisture. You get a chlorosis happening in the growing point. It starts to yellow, stunts the growth, and then could eventually die. And when we have that issue, of course, once there's no hemp there to be competitive, this is where weeds come into play, and again, then we have more of an issue on the food quality side. So it's important to try to find that proper field where we don't run into as many of these issues. This is a picture of a pedigreed seed field, drone picture, and you can just see what I'm talking about here. Anywhere that there was a major rain event, probably about 3 inches of rain shortly after seeding, you can see where hemp just did not survive in those low areas. The water ponded for too long of a time, and we have excessive amount of weeds growing in those low spots that can cause issues in the cleaning process. Getting into variety selection, again, this is very important aspect of it. When we're looking at variety selection, we will find that hemp research is becoming more of the norm, but is still quite scarce at this point in time, and especially if you're trying to find localized data. And that's as important as anything, to realize firsthand, get third-party testing data on how particular varieties perform in a specific area through it in its own environment. Of course, the more site years, the better. And as we begin the process, we've got a number of years already in Canada of collecting this data. It's starting to, of course, accumulate now in the U.S. much more, so that's becoming much more available. Don't always just take a look at strip childs or side-by-side comparisons with pictures. It's always good to have the site replicated, find out how well it did through statistics, and science-based decisions can be made then. So again, this is the list of approved cultivars or varieties in Canada. This is a little bit dated. This is a 2017, mind you, but just to give you an idea, all seed that's planted in Canada has to be of certified stature. So it has to be AOSCA certified, third-party inspected, certified seed can only be grown. And during that breeding process, or the production process for seed, is when we do our THC testing. And over a number of years, if the test results come back favorably, where we find that the variety is very stable, does not warrant any additional testing, then it can be put on the exempt from THC testing list. So if you take a look at our varieties here, CFX1, CFX2, CRS1, those three have all been put on the list and have not been tested for a number of years here, because there's enough data in the database that suggests that this is a stable variety that has no risk of, essentially, or very limited risk of going over that 0.3%. This is some of the localized data that I'm talking about as part of my job a few years back in looking at variety trials. These are sort of the most common varieties that are grown currently for grain in Canada. This is the part that I said, this is 1 year's worth of data on this right hand side here with 2015. You can see that there's a little bit of a resemblance, but there's certainly differences on year to year. So the more years that you have, and you can see here CRS1 is kind of the queen, I guess, of the varieties in Manitoba, particularly as far as it is considered the Czech variety that others are compared against. And we can see here that the percentage of yield difference over a number of years. So plant structure and stature is a very important aspect when choosing a variety. This is just a bit of a diagram on the two extremes, I guess, with a sativa and an indica plant, what they look like. Hemp grown for grain particularly is a sativa variety, much more taller. Most of the varieties now kind of don't have this bottom branching even. We've condensed the seed head for ease of harvest and high grain production. This branching just doesn't always necessarily result in yield. And in comparison, we have what I consider more of a Christmas tree looking for CBD production. Lots of branching, lots of buds, lots of flower for cannabinoid production. On the fiber side of things, this is the important part here, is this each little branch here that's called, it starts off as a node. The space in between those branches is called the internode, and that's where your high quality fiber comes from, but just as a side note. So again, some of the pictures of some cannabinoid type looking plants, very bushy. If you were to try to harvest with conventional harvest equipment, if these were grain varieties, you would have to run your header right to the bottom to make sure that you captured all the seed, if these indeed had seed in them. But of course, for the most part, these are feminized. In comparison, just for pictures, this is just a side picture of a field of Catani. You can see the seed head is all situated in the top quarter to third of the plant. The senescence of the leaf material in the bottom has started. Those leaves are dropping. You can still see that there was some very good weed control overall. Once those leaves are gone, basically those weeds have been suppressed. And on the right hand side here, again, these are more of a fiber variety or dual purpose also, with one of my young happy summer students from days gone by. Taking a look, again, this is kind of a picture that will talk a little bit about vigor and varieties and row spacing, or plant density, I should say. So this line here where we see the massive green on the right hand side, and actually it's in the right hand picture, these are the seed and fiber varieties that I have tested in my test research plot last year, versus the CBD varieties on the left hand picture. And even within the CBD varieties, everything was grown from seed, not transplants, and you can see the difference in plant germination, in plant vigor, how much quicker this one particular variety left of the orange flag has already started to have a canopy closure. The one straight in the middle of us here is getting there, and we see quite a bit of space on the variety that's on the left hand side. And this is where weed control becomes an extremely important factor, where we just can't have weeds starting to come into that area to compete with those hemp crops. On the right hand side, the grain and fiber varieties seeded at a much more dense population will have a stronger competition. But over time, things start to level out, and those CBD varieties, which are on the left-hand side here, definitely fill in. We've got a lot of biomass in there and weed competition, so after a certain period of time that can happen. Now, this is not perhaps the proper spacing on the CBD side of things. These plants were seeded at a tighter density, and what we were looking for here is actually to test them for the LOAC regulations. So seed or flower yield and such was not a part of this trial, just for information's sake. So kind of to summarize some of the things that you want to take a look at, of course, is seed yield, which is obviously very important. Grain yield, we call it, the height of the crop, which results in either having some difficulties with harvesting or not. Disease susceptibility in certain locations with higher humidity. We have issues with botrytis and sclerotinia. Herbicide tolerance, again, mentioned earlier. We do have 2 herbicides that are listed on the minor use program that we can utilize in our hemp growing fields in Canada, but it's not always necessary, but it is there if it's needed as an option. Maturity, most of the varieties coming out of Canada that are suited for the grain varieties are phototropic plants, photoperiod sensitive. That affects their maturity. Shelling is an important aspect, and there are certain varieties that perhaps lose the seed a little more easier later in the season as the bract material that's protecting the seed opens up to expose the seed. If you get into a windy situation with those large seed heads clashing with each other, you will get some shelling, so it's to be noted. And then on the CBD side, of course, cannabinoid content. So phototropic plants can be placed in a couple different categories, and most cannabis plants, or most of the varieties as mentioned, are short-day plants, which means that the trigger mechanism of going into its reproductive state needs 12 hours of darkness. Essentially is when the days start to get shorter, is what I'm trying to say. So it detects that the days are starting to get shorter, and again, that's what triggers its production into more from a biomass standpoint into more of a seed production aspect. So seeding could be one of the most challenging parts, I guess, seeding hemp seed. There's a large degree of variance, I guess, in genetics with regards to fertility, not fertility, but germination, vigor. A lot of those aspects are quite important. The way we can try to give hemp the best head start as possible is to try to seed shallow, and talking about a 1/2 to a 1 inch depth. For grain varieties, we try to target that 25 to 30 pounds per acre seeding rate. It results to about anywhere from 10 to 12 plants per foot square, and we do recommend higher seeding rates for fiber. Warm soils, I think most people will notice after a few years of growing hemp that hemp will certainly germinate at temperatures below 50 degrees, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and it in fact is some of the earliest volunteers, I guess, from the field. You'll see them very early in the springtime, and however, for a uniform plant stand, we just recommend that we wait a little while, get those soils into a nice average temperature of 50 to 55, some good moisture there seeding in, and we can have seed germinating and popping out of the ground within 3 to 4 days. It's a busy slide, and don't pay attention to all the numbers or try to memorize it for sure, but just wanted to point out here the difference in seeding rate. When we're seeding to a target population of 100 plants per square meter, if we are taking a look at the difference in seed size, and that's determined here by how many grams 1,000 kernels weigh. So as an extreme here, finola is the smallest seed in this list of varieties that we have here at 13 grams per 1,000 kernels, meaning that 1,000 kernels does not weigh that much, so very small seed compared to something like a CRS1 here at 17.3, or Canada at 19.5, or Patera. So those are large seeded cultivars or varieties, and you can see the difference that makes in seeding rate per pound. So try not to just seed on a per pound basis, but determine what your seed size is and plant accordingly. So if we were planting at trying our target planting for 100 seeds per meter squared, we would actually be planting 18 pounds to the acre of Finola, as opposed to 27.5 pounds for Patera. So again, the difference in that 25 to 30 pounds is takes into this account, and so it's best to try to be as accurate as you can. This is our seeding unit up at our farm, and it's probably one of the most common units, I guess, on the western Canadian prairies. This air seeder. Our anhydrous tank is our fertility in the back. Seed and other fertilizers are carried in the middle tank. And the only point I wanted to make here is that it's extremely accurate, but we want to make sure that these secondary manifolds, this is air-delivered seed, goes through these tubes, starts bouncing around in these manifolds. We want to make sure that the air speed or air pressure, I guess, moving that seed along there is not so high that those seeds actually get crushed in those manifolds. So it's a very easy, there's just a couple clips on the top there. You can take a look inside, and if you've got what looks like coffee grounds, then you'd best turn your RPM down on your fan speed until you stop that cracking process. Onto fertility again. This is a nutrient uptake trial we did a few years back, showing how much of each of the 4 main nutrients that hemp utilizes for total plant. And kilograms per hectare is fairly easily converted to pounds per acre. I think you just minus about 10%. So we're looking at it, we'll just keep it straight here. So hemp, as compared to canola, will utilize up to 200 pounds of nitrogen or units per acre on a season. Phosphorus and potassium also fairly high on the potassium side. That's a lot for straw strength and moving nutrients up and down the stalk. So just a note that it is a hungry plant. You need to feed it so it will be competitive with weeds, and again, that's a very important aspect when you're trying to grow a high quality grain. You don't have as many weed seeds, you have a much cleaner field. Diseases, I mentioned, could be an issue. Here we have what's a sclerotia body within the stalk of a hemp plant, and if that goes through the combine, it goes into this hopper and is mixed in with the grain. As it's handled, that could break into smaller pieces and can often escape the seed cleaning process. And when somebody opens up a nice creamy white bag of hemp hearts and sees an obstacle like that, their mind of course goes to a rodent, and then you get a lot of calls to quality control. So I know everybody or anybody that's eaten sunflower seeds has probably tasted one of these sclerotia bodies. It's not a real death sentence by all means, but just not a very good product to have in your hemp hearts. This is kind of what it looks like in the field. This called botrytis, which is along the same family of sclerotinia, and the same kind of, they're basically kind of two in the same when they happen with each other. So weed control, again mentioned that we do have a couple of options in Canada with regards to in-crop spraying or pre-plant control of weeds. So the other options that we have using an integrated pest management, we can till the land right up to and just prior to seeding. The risk there is drying the soil out too much or creating lumps if the soil is too moist. We want to make sure that we have a very nice seed bed to plant into. So that's the advantage and the disadvantage. Variety selection, we looked at the different stature, so we have an understanding which variety might be a little more aggressive, have more biomass to compete with those weeds and suppress those weeds. Seeding rates are important, as we saw in that other picture again, and making sure that we have adequate plant densities there to suppress weeds. Fertility, again, for a nice stronger plant and good grain production. Having a good crop rotation. We can't just be growing hemp on hemp on hemp, so I know there's a lot of what people consider hemp farmers out there. I am a farmer who has hemp in my rotation, is the way I like to put it. I grow other commodities also. Hemp is a very important one as far as keeping a proper rotation and having, essentially it's a good option for weed control, disease control. It keeps Mother Nature guessing a little bit if you have more diversity, of course. In-crop tillage, we now have equipment manufacturers that have cameras mounted on the tillage implement that when you get too close to the actual row of the crop, they move the hitch over so that you stay in the middle. We have GPS and what is called RTK capability, where we can have follow a direct line with auto steer and keep everything very straight. So the technology is there to do in-crop tillage. Good old plastic mulch, very expensive, but for high-end value crops, on the cannabinoid side, maybe that is the best option also. And then really finally herbicides, it kind of can be used as sort of the last option. So grain harvest management, aside from seeding, is of course, as we watch hemp grow, it's the most enjoyable part of the summer. The field changes so quickly during the month of July. A question often asked is, when is it the time to harvest? And it's a little bit tricky with hemp because you will see a fair bit of green that's still in the crop itself, and this head is actually quite close to being harvested. And if you can kind of take a look closely here, you can see what I was talking about, this brown material in the bottom here. This is the bract material. The seed is exposed. You can see that what happens is the maturity happens from the closest to the stalk in this stem and then goes outward. So the majority of these seeds are already exposed. It's mature. There's some green material that is going to have an effect on the seed moisture, but this crop is looking pretty good to be harvested now. The moisture, essentially, when it gets to this, is somewhere in that range of 10 to 20%. And the importance of that is having that stalk remain green, because that pectin and lignin that are holding all the fibers together is still pliable, and the stalk stays together through the process of thrashing and goes out the back of the combine and doesn't bust up within the combine and start to wrap on stuff. And we've got some pictures to show you what that looks like. So again, this was my harvest machine of choice back in the research days, and I still run this one. We use this in our breeding program up here in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Also, again, as a pedigree grower, I switched over to a much larger machine, which potentially could have much larger problems. So there's a few things that I just wanted to run by here, and hemp's ability to wrap on in and on areas of the combine that you wouldn't even fathom. So this is just a shaft with a spline that had just some bit of roughness to the edges, I guess, and it was a very prime spot for hemp to start wrapping. And I always mentioned tongue-in-cheek that one of the best qualities about hemp is it's the strongest naturally occurring fiber in the world, and one of the crappiest things about hemp is that it's the strongest naturally occurring fiber in the world. And so when we're harvesting, we want to be making sure that our mind is set on what kind of a job we're doing in the combine. Is our cylinder speed set right? Are we cracking the hemp again because we don't want any of that oxidation? Do we have too much debris in there? Or do we have too little debris in there? Are we throwing hemp out the back of the combine? So those are the things that we want to have our mind active with, not having to deal with little bundles of fiber here. So to alleviate that problem, a little bit of PVC pipe and some duct tape, and there was no place for hemp to grab onto, and that keeps your mind on the job at hand instead of what's happening down below in the combine. This is what I mentioned inside the internal components of the combine. This is a beater in the back of the combine, where you can see hemp fiber starting to wrap around the shaft here. Get into that bearing could cause issues. So a quick fix for that was just putting some baler belting on every second knife there, and sweeps the side of the wall and keeps fiber from wrapping around that shaft. So there's lots of tips and tricks that can be learned and passed on down, so that others don't have to have the same amount of bloody knuckles, I guess, from pulling hemp out of those very tight spaces. Mentioned the seed moisture. It's important to make sure that you have a handle on what the seed moisture is. I believe Dickie John does have hemp charts now. This is a Canadian seed tester. I don't know if it's actually Canadian, but it's one of the most prominent one that's found in Canada. A lot of the elevators and grain elevators receiving grain use this model. So a lot of farmers have the same one so that they're consistent with the grain elevator. So it's a 919 Labtronics. You go to the Canadian Grain Commission and you can get the charts that you actually take the temperature of the grain, turn the dial that determines what the electrical conductivity is, cross-reference, and you get to know fairly accurately what the moisture is in a quick manner. So when we're harvesting that grain at a temperature or a moisture that's above what's considered dry and safe storage, which is 9% moisture, we're harvesting in that 10 to even up to the teens, 17, 18% moisture. Hopper bottom bins like this come in very handy. Again, you kind of have to figure out what works for your area, but for us, these are used extensively for the canola industry. Also, hopper bottom bin with an aeration fan to blow air through there. And what our suggestion is, probably within 4 hours of harvest, that you should have that grain into this bin with this air flowing through to push the moisture out the top of the lids. And it just uses the ambient moisture, ambient temperature from outside. You can put a supplemental heat source on here to draw warm air, and once the season gets a little bit late in the season and cool air is the only thing to pull through. But that's the important thing. And then of course the hopper bottom is very handy to be able to empty the bin completely so that we don't have any hot spots within that bin. The other option is a straight grain dryer. This is just an all-purpose grain dryer. New models, of course, can be set to have a very low temperature, which is important. When we're drying, we want to make sure that we dry low and slow to avoid toasting the hemp. We do have a toasted hemp product, but it's best left to us to do that. What we're working against for mold and growth are time, temperature, and moisture. Time is the only thing that we can really have an effect on. So again, getting that grain down into that 9% or less as quickly as possible, or not as quickly as possible because you want to go slow, but as quickly as possible in the sense that having air running through the grain is extremely important to maintain its quality. So long-term storage, there's going to be times where you may have to store your hemp grain for a period of time, and you want to make sure that it's as cold and dry as possible, running air through it every once in a while so that your bins aren't sweating. You know, there isn't a large difference between what's the temperature inside the bin to outside. All those things are beneficial. And then just handling the grain itself, making sure that the harvest and handling equipment is very clean. Clean out the bins that you're going to store it in very well. Don't have other crops in there, and then eliminate all those opportunities for rodents or birds and other pests. You know, birds can be, could be bird excrement in the hemp seed. The birds obviously love hemp seed, and having any sort of E. coli that can be delivered through birds like that could be a major factor. And to prevent spoilage and moisture, we kind of use moisture cables. So just in closing, just want to show you one of the fields that I grew that I was actually kind of proud of, quite proud of. This is a pedigreed field of Catani, and Mother Nature just seemed to really cooperate for us. We had this field was south facing, so we had some good slope. It's a moderately clay soil, as mentioned. This area on top of this hill here, there's a little sandy area, and you can see what happens there. We didn't quite perform right where that gravelly spot was, but as we get, you can kind of see here, we go over this hill that we have a very nice stand, very competitive with weeds, very large seed heads, and in fact this field ended up yielding just under 2,000 pounds, which is closer to what I would expect for an irrigated field. But as I mentioned, Mother Nature threw us a lofty one, gave us just the right amount of moisture, not too much, and just kept this field being fed with the fertility and yeah, it was one that maybe could be one of a lifetime, hopefully not, but that's just an example of when things go right. I've got plenty of fields that I've grown that don't quite look like that, but we'll just leave those for another day. So that's it for my presentation. I believe I'll be involved with some questions. This is how you can get a hold of me, whether it's for hemp genetics for grain fiber, and we are now in Canada. We have distribution rights for the very first AOSCA certified high CBD variety that's on the list of approved cultivars in Canada called CBF1 with a company called Tritium 3H we have a partnership with. And as always, enjoy talking about agronomy and seem to learn just as much as I'm able to help other people out. So look forward to it. Anyway, thank you very much once again to the organizing committee, and yeah, hopefully we'll have some questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.